Statement first. I'd like to restate again New Zealand's absolute condemnation of the Hamas attack on Israel in the last 48 hours. I have had a conversation this morning with my Australian counterpart, Prime Minister Albanese, to compare notes. I think the New Zealand position and the Australian position are very aligned. We've agreed that we'll keep in touch and make sure that we're aligning our efforts. I've also spoken to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and asked her to make sure that New Zealand is poised and ready to contribute to any international humanitarian response to the situation. We'll see how things unfold, but we will be ready to participate in any kind of humanitarian response. And I've asked the Minister of Foreign Affairs to make sure that we're ready to do that. So we can do questions on that first. Options are on the table for all of the sorts of things that we have done in humanitarian situations in the past. My understanding is that a draft was provided to her office. I don't have a chapter and verse of exactly how all of that unfolded, but my understanding is that the source material for that was a draft provided by MFAT.
When you spoke to Anthony Albanese, did he express any concerns about the initial statement and it being a bit soft and a bit out of line with what Australia had said?
No, not at all. I mean, I think my statement yesterday made very clear New Zealand's position.
Have anyone raised not about any statement about crime?
No.
Have any New Zealanders been caught up with this? Have you had confirmation?
So I went through the numbers yesterday in terms of the number of New Zealanders on the Safe Travel website. I think there was only one in the Palestinian territory, and there were a couple of dozen, I can't remember the exact number, in Israel registered on the Safe Travel website. There are still commercial flights leaving at the moment from Israel, so there are opportunities for any New Zealanders who are in the area to leave. In terms of MFAT's travel advice, the advice at the moment is there is a do not travel advice for Gaza and for wider travel to Israel. MFAT's advice is essential travel only.
And information about any specific danger that any of those New Zealanders might be in either Gaza or in Israel?
No, I haven't, and we don't typically share individual details of those sorts of cases, but consular support is absolutely available, and so we'll be making sure that that information is shared with anybody who has registered on the Safe Travel website.
Contact with those people?
Certainly if they want it, then contact is available.
So there's no suggestion that any Kiwis or anyone under hostage or in a threatening situation at the moment?
No, we've not had any reports of any New Zealanders being caught up in the immediate conflict, so either through injury or through being hostages. Obviously, if that were to happen, we would respond accordingly.
In terms of the Labour Party's policy with Palestine,
Yeah.
is there any changes to that? Are you still...
The Labour Party's ongoing commitment, and in fact it's consistent with the New Zealand Government's commitment, which is applied under successive governments, is that we are committed to a two-state solution. Obviously recognising the aggressive, unwarranted attacks that have happened in the last 48 hours, of course, we will consider that and the speed with which we action any further response around the recognition of Palestinian diplomats in New Zealand.
Chris, you've affirmed Israel's right to defend itself.
Yes.
Palestine's UN ambassador Riyad Mansour's concerned that will be interpreted as a licence to kill. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Look, it's regrettable that Hamas has launched this attack. I think Israel is well within its rights to defend itself.
And that's not a licence to kill, as the Palestinian representative?
Look, there are international conventions about proportionality of response and so on, and we would expect all countries to follow that.
Are you saying that the Nahuja's response, sorry, just clarify, was based on a draft provided to her from the ministry?
That's certainly my understanding. I think we've well and truly moved on from that in the sense that I made a very clear statement yesterday of New Zealand's position, and I think all of our international partners have accepted that as New Zealand's position.
But you've said that this morning that the statement didn't go far enough initially when you followed up with...
Look, it was a tweet. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over it. I made it very clear what our position was yesterday.
So if it came from the ministry, are you going to follow that up at all?
Look, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to have a conversation with them in due course about that. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, all right, so I move on to other issues of the day, and I see once again the National Party's final week of the campaign is again in meltdown today, with David Seymour now threatening to hold a potential national government to ransom on a daily basis now. That would be a recipe for instability and chaos. The idea that you could have Christopher Luxon and Winston Peters trying to form a government with David Seymour on a daily basis, threatening to veto any decisions that the government might take, shows the kind of chaos that you could expect under a National Act New Zealand First government. I don't think that New Zealanders deserve that. And I think the best way for them to avoid that is to give their party vote to Labour. We've got a proven track record of delivering stable and responsible government for New Zealand in some very difficult circumstances, and I'm confident that we would be able to continue to do that after the election. I think a National Act New Zealand First coalition would be unstable, they'd be unable to agree on anything. And in fact, the idea of a National Act coalition now seems to be in complete turmoil as well, with David Seymour saying that unless Christopher Luxon agrees with everything that he wants, that he's actually not going to form a coalition with them. I just think that this unedifying spectacle this close to an election is a bit of a taste of what New Zealanders could expect if Christopher Luxon becomes Prime Minister. And I think that New Zealand deserves and needs more stable government than that. Well, the consequences of unstable government for New Zealand as a whole can be quite significant. You speak to any retailer, and I've spoken to quite a few of them in the last few weeks, and they will tell you that in a run-up to a general election, things slow down a bit. People stop spending money because of the uncertainty that a general election creates. We could be talking about that uncertainty persisting for months or even years under a National Act New Zealand First government. That's going to be bad for the economy. It's going to be bad for people's jobs. It's going to be bad for the management of our public services like health and education, where things could just grind to a halt.
And what mistakes or approaches do you think that were wrong from Labour and that you've maybe fed into that vote at this point?
Well, look, I've set out a 10-point plan that does focus on the number one issue facing New Zealanders at the moment, which is the cost of living. Unlike Christopher Luxon and the National Party, the 10-point plan that I've set out is realistic, and New Zealanders can clearly see how they're going to benefit from it. And we're not trying to sell them something that's not going to happen, which Christopher Luxon and the National Party seem to be doing. Even now, after correcting themselves, they still continue to make the misleading claim that the average New Zealand family would be $250 a fortnight better off, when they've admitted that that's not the case.
Labour's had lots of big ideas that have not been delivered in many cases. What can you say to people to actually convince them that you're going to be able to deliver on the promises that you've made?
Well, I think that's a very broad and unsubstantiated assertion that you've made in your question. The Labour Party has been involved in some very significant change for New Zealand. We have been rebuilding our health system and our education system. We have been rebuilding our public housing, and we've stimulated the largest private sector house building program pretty much in New Zealand's history. So, look, I'm not claiming perfection, but I'm certainly claiming an improvement on what we had before.
What can you say to people to convince them that your government will be able to deliver on the promises that you've been made?
Well, I'd like New Zealanders to give us a clear run at it. We won't have the global pandemic hanging over us in this next term of Parliament. And I think that will give us an opportunity to deliver on the things that we have put before the electorate. I've made sure that the commitments we're making in this election campaign are realistic and deliverable. I stand by every single one of them, and I'm absolutely confident we can deliver them.
What is your path to power, and how much do the numbers need to shift around for you to remain Prime Minister?
I think the results that we see on election day are going to be much, much narrower than what we have seen in recent polling. We saw that at the last election as well, where there was quite a shift between the polls immediately before the election and what happened on the election day. Labour's support was understated and National support was well and truly overstated by the polls before the last election. I think the same thing is going to happen here.
So how much needs to change for you to remain as Prime Minister? What is that path?
Our own, well, I'm not going to give you all of the details and the numbers. Our own polling shows that the gap between the centre left and the centre right, so i.e. National Act and Labour Greens, has been narrowing consistently over the last few weeks, and it is a very close race.
Is it what voters want, though? Don't they want change at the top?
I don't think so. I think that as voters have the opportunity to see what a change actually means, and they see the instability and chaos that change could bring, I think we're going to see our numbers going up, on Saturday night. I think it's going to be a very close election. And I think if New Zealanders want stability and they want certainty, then giving their party vote to Labour is the best way of achieving that. Look, it's going to be a close election.
Are you worried about voter turnout on the basis that with this campaign in particular we have seen lots of attacks, both the rhetoric and of course the physical attacks that have gone on as well? We're now seeing a narrative in the last week to 10 days of there might be a second election. Do you think that voters might just go, what on earth is this all about? Why do we care? Completely tune out?
I think the National Party saying or threatening New Zealanders with a second election before this one is even over shows how unprepared and unready to be government they are. They have no plan to provide stable government for New Zealand. It seems to be more of, well, just trust us, we'll figure it out. But now they're even saying that they don't think they can figure it out and that there might have to be another election. The best way to avoid that is to give your party vote to Labour.
But are you genuinely worried about voter turnout because of the narrative and I guess the vibe, for want of a better word, that this campaign has actually had over the last few weeks?
I think what we've seen, and even in the conversations that I've had, out and about today, which some of you were eavesdropping on, there are people who have decided that they're going to vote late, that they're going to vote on election day, or they're going to vote quite late in the piece. That's understandable.
And that's what you're relying on, is people holding off and you proving yourself in the next 5 days, whatever it is?
Well, I think there's already been a mood change within the electorate. I think that's been happening over the last couple of weeks now. And I think the election result is going to be quite different to what the polls have been showing up until now.
Showing about the treaty undersigned voters as opposed to what the state. But what's your sense of the number of people that truly have not made up their mind?
I think it's still a pretty sizable block of people who are going to make up their minds, potentially even on the day when they head to the polling booth.
Your part of the power, though, relies on the National Forum, New Zealand First Forum, short of 5. That seems quite slim possibility.
Not necessarily. I mean, let's just see what the numbers are on the day. But I think that we're seeing a good degree of momentum behind Labour's campaign. As I've said, I think we're going to do better than the polls have been indicating we're going to do, and it is going to be a close race.
What do you mean not necessarily, though? You both ruled each other out, so if he does get over 5%.
Oh, I'm certainly not working with New Zealand First. Let's be clear. If New Zealand First holds the balance of power, it's going to be incumbent on Christopher Luxon to figure out how to put a government together, because he is the one who is committed to doing that.
So if they get over 5%, then you'll pass the power. That's basically zero.
Well, I said that them getting into Parliament doesn't necessarily mean holding the balance of power.
Away from internal polling, though, which has gone through with the voters, I didn't really see much warmth or research, and I spoke to a few people who you said hello to. Some of them told me after you met them, they were still going to vote passion. So is the Labour plan really getting through? Is it really resonating with voters?
No, look, if you've been following the campaign for the duration of the campaign, there of course are always going to be a few National Party voters out there, but there are certainly plenty more Labour voters.
Chris, you claim...
Campaign, I'm a report from the BBC, so I've just gotten in to speak to see
Yeah.
how New Zealand is doing. Every New Zealander I speak to say that they want to move and change. They're sick and tired of Labour, and they just don't really resonate or think that you're doing enough job. So they might not like the National, but they feel that it's trying to change. And that's what they tell me. What do you say to that?
I don't agree with that assessment, and I think what we're finding actually as we head into the last few days of the campaign, that New Zealanders who had been contemplating change are actually rethinking that because they've seen what a mess the other side would make of things.
Have you seen that mess? Sorry, one other question. I was there at home ground where you were earlier today.
Yeah.
You've been, saying hello to the voters in the food court down here, this flashing wall. But you didn't say hello to anyone at home ground.
I went in.
Want to speak to any of the people there?
I'd say hello to people who I run into along the campaign trail.
Do you know that before you arrived at home ground, there were a few homeless people in the laneway, and they were asked to clear the alleyway when you came in?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
Would you have said that?
I certainly would have happily had a conversation with them if I'd seen them.
You claim
Jessica.
that...
Saying that their candidate for a meeting they were threatened by gangs. What's the reaction to that? And is that a sign of the situation we're in at the moment?
Any physical threats to a candidate's safety are utterly unacceptable, regardless of who the candidate is, regardless of which political party they are standing for. All candidates are entitled to get out there, share their views, campaign, and to do that in a way that is safe.
It's not a great look being in the campaigning crime and being trying to
Look, those are really questions for the National Party. The reality, though, is that I don't think any New Zealanders should have their physical safety threatened during an election
But I
campaign.
mean, specifically talking about crime, do you feel like you have crime under control? Do you feel like the government's doing enough?
In the last year, police have laid 50,000 charges against gang members. They've seized over 500 firearms from gang members. I'm absolutely confident that we're backing police with the tools that they need in order to crack down on gang crime.
Regarding Andrew Barr's story that it took the Pacific People's boss 9 months to pay back some of the contribution from his party, what will Labour's approach to the public service be next term? Do you want a harder line from the next commissioner?
Look, I think we took a pretty hard line on that one. That was unjustified expense. I think it is appropriate that that was paid back. In terms of the length of time that it takes to pay that back, that's really a question for the Commissioner.
Can I just ask about water reforms? Are you going with 3 waters or
Affordable water reforms.
Wayne Brown, you might have seen some comments he's been making. He's been making a plea to National for them to fund water infrastructure. The Crown to anyway. What do you make of this?
I think Wayne Brown knows, like many local authorities across the country know, that if we back away from affordable water reform, ratepayers are going to end up paying the bill for that on their rates. National's plan to simply abandon affordable water reform means that ratepayers are going to end up with significant rates hikes in the coming years because they're effectively, to excuse the pun, washing their hands of the problem and making it council's problem. Well, there's a breakdown out there now. You can see on a region-by-region basis the types of rates increases that they will see if we don't proceed with affordable water reform, and the sorts of impact that affordable water reform will have in terms of bringing those rates increases down. We've released the breakdown of that, and it's basically through getting economies of scale and making sure that we're actually delivering water infrastructure in the most efficient way possible. Well, I think it looks pretty panicky. I mean, the fact of the matter is that people haven't even finished voting in this election and they're already talking about potentially forcing another one. I'm not sure how you could characterise that as anything other than panicky. Of course it's scaremongering, but it also shows that they don't think they could pull a stable government together. I don't think that that's going to endear them to the New Zealand public. It doesn't inspire confidence. My message to the New Zealand public is if you don't want another election, if you want stable, responsible government, give your party vote to Labour.
But you find though, aren't you scaremongering when you say really style shut down? Because obviously we have different systems and see that, like, isn't it, do you know what I mean? Like, and don't
We do have a different system because we've got a system of confidence and supply that means that the government of the day can continue to govern, and as soon as they don't have that, then there's a general election. David Seymour is basically saying that he's not willing to offer supply. Now, supply means money. Without money, you will end up in a US-like situation where the government can't function on a day-to-day basis. I think our value systems are quite different.
If you had to start talking to avoid a second election, is that something in any way in consideration?
No.
In any sense?
No,
Chris, are you
absolutely
being slightly
not.
hypocritical?
And I know you're smiling to that response, but if you step back and have a look at it, wouldn't selecting the best people from your team, the best people from National, wouldn't that be really good for New Zealand?
I actually don't think it would be good for democracy. Democracy ultimately relies on a contest of ideas. It relies on there being a government and there being an opposition.
Chris, are you being slightly hypocritical about saying National would pretty much be hamstrung by ACT if they were to be in government when the Greens, your potential coalition partner, have already said we're happy to be on the backbenches if you don't install a wealth or capital gains tax and take on some of their ideas which you're steadfastly against? Aren't you hamstrung like
the Green Party, neither the Green Party or the Māori Party are threatening to bring down the government and force a by-election if they're in a position to do so, or not a by-election, another general election if they're in a position to do so. But they will not, and I'm absolutely confident that they won't.
How are you so confident about that?
Because that is not the way they've operated during the time we've been working with them in government. So let's be clear, the Green Party could have brought down the government at any point between 2017 and 2020, and they didn't. They worked very constructively with us during that
very
time.
strong about their hard line.
Scenario, though. I mean, in that scenario, you had a coalition government with the Greens and Hipkins. This time, potentially, they would have the leverage, as with the Māori Party, to put Labour into government. So So you're saying they have no leverage, they'll do whatever we say. If that's the option, they'll just go with us and put us into government.
Coalition governments and confidence and supplier governments inevitably involve compromise, but not where we've said that we're definitely not where we've said that we're definitely not going to do something. No, there are plenty of areas where we can compromise and we can work together, but not on issues around a wealth tax.
Chris, are you pretty much saying that you're happy to be on the backbenches because you're not willing to install a wealth or capital gains tax, like the Greens have said? Because they've already said hardline.
They have not said that they would force another election by doing that.
Co-governance has obviously been pretty divisive over the last couple of years. You have received good feedback in terms of the speech that you gave about a month or so ago now. And you've recently done an interview with Moana as well. Are you worried that when you look back, the lack of talking about what it is that you think co-governance is, what it boils down to, the fact that you've got really articulate in explaining it now, and it hasn't happened earlier, and it didn't happen under Jacinda Ardern in that way either, and was left to people like Willie Jackson and the Naya Mahuta, is in the end going to potentially be the downfall for?
I've said that I think we should have been more outspoken in explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it. I've endeavoured to be more open and more explanatory in the time that I have been Prime Minister. The speech that I gave a couple of weeks ago was building on one that I did at Waitangi not long after I became Prime Minister. And my interview with Moana yesterday was the second interview where we canvassed these issues, and I've spoken publicly on several other occasions about it. I'm really proud of what we have done.
Have senior cabinet ministers and prime ministers underestimated how much of an issue that was going to be and how divisive it would end up becoming?
I think we probably shouldn't have left it to just our Māori MPs to front that for as long as we did. I'm very proud of the track record that we have there. I don't think that non-Māori New Zealanders have anything to fear from it. In fact, I think as a country we have everything to gain by a stronger relationship between the Crown and Māori, and by dealing with some of the underlying issues around health and education and those systems underserving our Māori communities, which they've done for some time.
Why was it left to the Māori ministers?
Look, I think we probably could have been more proactive. I'm endeavouring to be more proactive.
But why was it left?
Well, look, that's an impossible question to answer.
Was it seen as a Māori issue?
No, I don't think so. I just think we could have been more proactive about it.
The relative vacuum there was filled with that one little kind of rhetoric that Don Brash used. That's now like a mainstream narrative. You get some responsibility.
I think people not pushing back hard enough against racism isn't an excuse for racism.
Speaking of Indigenous issues,
Yes.
across the Tasman, Australia Sunday is having their own route to Western America. What do you think about that?
Look, it wouldn't be diplomatic for me to involve myself in in an Australian referendum, which is just coming up for vote. That's really a matter for the Australian people.
Sure. Any commentary then on how Australia deals with Indigenous issues as compared to New Zealand?
But very, very different countries, very different situations, very different histories. And so I wouldn't, certainly not publicly, be proffering advice to them.
Do you expect the Labour government there, though, are trying to push forward this way?
Obviously, there's a lot of goodwill between the Australian Labor government and the New Zealand Labor government. We have a lot in common, but I'm not going to involve myself in domestic Australian politics.
Do you think that race relations has gone backwards in some aspects in the last couple of years?
I think that there are some who certainly seem intent on attempting to achieve that. I don't think overall that New Zealand's heading backwards in terms of our race relations. I think that overall, if you look at our track record as a country, so taking the political party part of it out of it, our track record as a country over the last 40 years or so has bent towards history.
Christopher Luxon also wants locally led
Progress, bent towards progress. Sorry, I just, you got the bit that I would mean, yeah.
Christopher Luxon also wants locally led, whānau-centred, by Māori, for Māori solutions. Don't you guys want the same thing?
Well, that's not what they're arguing for, though. They're actually, but that's what he says. But then he wants to undo every one of the examples of that. So the Māori Health Authority is a by Māori for Māori initiative. It isn't actually that much difference to Te Whana Ora, for example, which was actually put in place during the time of a national government. I just think they're all over the show on it.
Do you think Whana Ora is an example of co-governance?
I think Whana Ora is an example of working together.
Is that co-governance
I mean, look, the reality is co-governance is just one iteration of working together, and it means different things in different contexts. I think it's a bit of a red herring of a phrase, to be honest. Look, what a lot of New Zealanders hear when they hear co-governance is the idea of co-government. No one has ever been proposing that.
Just to put the definition that National has put in co-governance to you, which came from Tama Potaka, he says that co-governance should only be used in relation to natural resources and that it shouldn't be used in any other forms of public service. What's your definition when you look at it from that context?
Kia ora kaupapa Māori, ko hangarewa Māori, wānanga. These are all examples of co-governance arrangements that have been in place under successive governments that have worked very effectively, adopting a by Māori for Māori approach where the Crown and Māori share decision-making over the provision of public services. So I think that the position that Tama Potaka seems to be advocating is actually a really radical one, because it would mean stopping doing a lot of things that have got a long track record of success.
Some of National's criticisms of the Māori Health Authority are based on performance. How long should that authority have to be delivering what it's supposed to do?
Well, it's only just getting up and running. I mean, we're talking about a couple of years. I think we need to give it some time to actually get up and running. But, you know, Christopher Luxon's position on that is very confused, because he says he supports the role of Māori health providers but not the Māori Health Authority. Well, I'm not sure how he defines the difference between the two.
Health Authority performing as you'd expect given the time frame that it's had?
Well, I think that they've only just gotten up and running, so I don't think it's too soon to make any judgment either way on it.
So what are your expectations, though, of performance, like, in terms of delivering what it's supposed to do?
Well,
It's one of the criticisms that the opposition has of the authority.
Overall, the goal of the Māori Health Authority will be to turn around health outcomes for Māori New Zealanders. That's why we've set it up. That's not going to be an overnight process.
Just on that, the equity indicator, I can't remember the exact words of it, that Nzherald ended up doing a bit of a review of at the time that it became public, and there was a lot of feedback about it. What actually ended up happening with that review, and where are things at with doctors and DHBs individually being able to make decisions about that prioritisation of non-urgent surgery?
So clinical need will always be the number one criteria. What their review did find, and we shared that information at the time, was that the work that they were doing here was to address a historical discrimination against Māori, Pacific and people from rural communities who were waiting longer for their surgery than other people with the same clinical need. I think proactively addressing that is a good thing. It isn't actually favouring anybody, it's saying that they shouldn't be discriminated against in the way that they have been.
So that formula, DHBs continue to use, and doctors have the ability to use it in the same way they were using it before Nzherald did the review?
That's probably a question best directed at Nzherald in terms of the most recent, in terms of the most...
From you or from the Cabinet, that there needed to be a change in the way that formula was being used for non-urgent surgery.
As I have said, where they are proactively addressing historic discrimination by ensuring that there isn't discrimination, I support it.
If there's another election, would you want it before Christmas or after Christmas?
There is absolutely no justification for another election. New Zealanders are about to go to the polls this coming Saturday. They will make their decisions about how to govern. They have about who should govern them. They've got a very clear choice: a Labour-led government that will provide stable, responsible leadership for New Zealand, or a coalition of chaos led by Christopher Luxon and the National Party, which can't seem to agree on anything in opposition, let alone try and run the country.
How would you relate your...
Yeah, we're just going to take another couple.
How would you rate your skills on the rugby field today?
Passable, but I'm not expecting to call up anytime soon.
How would you compare to your skills on the campaign trail?
I haven't spent any time thinking about it.
Chris, recently community pharmacists raised real concerns about National dodging questions about ownership laws. You guys have committed to extend the current sort of situation. Is that a concern that you share as well, about potential big companies taking over local ownership?
I don't want to see a corporatised environment where small communities lose access to their pharmacies. Actually, in terms of accessible healthcare, pharmacies, particularly in smaller isolated communities, are often a lifeline for those communities. And I would hate to see us reach an environment where it just becomes unviable for those pharmacies to continue to operate.
And in terms of the seat, it's going to be very tightly contested, some really strong candidates. How confident are you in your candidate right behind you?
I'm feeling very confident. I think he's an excellent candidate. Do you want to come and
Absolutely.
say a few words?
Yeah, look, I'm just campaigning hard until election day. It's been a great experience as a first-time candidate here in Auckland Central, and the youngest of the three of us that are vying in this race. So yeah, just out here having fun, and it's really good to have a walk around.
What are the main
this morning.
issues that you're sort of campaigning on for Auckland Central?
Definitely making Auckland Central safer, campaigning also on housing and on renters' rights and all of these sorts of things that are really important to the city centre community.
Any thoughts on the opposition you're up against? They're pretty strong candidates. You're confident you're backing yourself? I'm
backing myself. You know, look, all I can do is campaign hard until Saturday, and that's what I'm out here doing today. Well, I'm young, and this is one of the youngest seats in the country. She is, and I've had a background in housing policy, and that's obviously one of the biggest issues facing young people at the moment. So I'm keen to keep that work going, and also bring my experience in software engineering to Parliament.
Thanks, everyone. All right, thank you. All right.